So let's kick it off with our first speaker. He's a Palm Beach Post photographer. Let's hear it for Andres Leiva.
So I was 8 years old when my parents changed my life forever. They called me up to the bedroom one day. I was like, am I in trouble? And they said, no, you're not in trouble. Actually, we have really great news. And I said, am I gonna get a little brother? And they said, no, not a little brother. It's actually better than that. And I said, better than a little brother? And they said, yeah. We're moving to El Salvador. And I said, could I have the little brother instead? You see, my family's from El Salvador, but for all 8 years of my life until then, the only life that I'd known was living in Miami, in Kendall. I was born in Baptist Hospital, South Miami. I was born on June 23rd, 1994. It was a Wednesday, and I know that because I just looked it up before going up here. And my favorite restaurants were Pizza Hut and, yes, Taco Bell. A few of us like Taco Bell. But El Salvador, much like taxes and going to work, that was stuff my parents worried about. That wasn't me. That was a life that my parents left when they moved to the US in 1992. And so the thought of moving to El Salvador was rather shocking. It was shocking because it meant leaving behind my friends, it meant leaving behind my school. And so, without maybe really understanding the ramifications of it, I remember I cried. I remember I cried, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried, and I think eventually my parents got tired of me crying because conveniently, somehow a Game Boy arrived on my bedroom one night, and that was the end of that. But, so we moved. We took the longest 2.5-hour plane ride to El Salvador. And I remember when we landed, I landed on this alien world that was nothing like I'd ever seen before. We landed, I remember this airport, it was like nothing else before I'd ever seen. The passenger terminal was open almost to the elements. I remember there was dogs roaming around among the suitcases. I was looking out for my dad, like, hey Dad, don't let that dog lift his leg on your suitcase. It was dusty. I remember there was families getting into the back of pickup trucks, 6 people in the back of pickup trucks with luggage going home. And I remember that there was a man with one leg. His pant leg was rolled up. And I remember he was coming up to my dad saying, lucky, 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 in Spanish. And it kind of frightened me until my dad explained what was going on. He said, no, hijo, son, this is how he makes a living. He's selling lottery tickets. This is how he feeds his family. And I think my dad saw my face and just how utterly gobsmacked I was because he said, like, hijo, no te preocupes, don't worry. We're home now. And I remember looking at my dad and I said, no, Dad, you're home. You're home. I'm not home. My home was in Miami. And so, I don't know if you know anything about El Salvador, but El Salvador is known for 2 things. One of those is coffee beans, and the other one is gang violence. And so, as you can imagine, El Salvador is a pretty different world, full of pretty different experiences. One of the things that's really different about El Salvador is we have, well, I guess here you would call them domestic helpers, but in El Salvador we call them family. And it's often women, sometimes men, but it's these people that come and live in your home, and they help around the house. They help raise children. They help with keeping the house clean. They help with, doing dishes, whatever the case might be. And when we moved to El Salvador, we moved in with my great aunt, Tia Evita. And Tia Evita had a domestic helper whose name was Elia. And Elia was my first friend in El Salvador. See, Elia was this sweet, sweet lady who was probably 75 when I'd met her. And she was about this tall. She had bright white silver hair, and she had a toothless grin. When she smiled, she just showed you all gums. But I loved her smile because when she smiled, it felt like you're the most special person in the world. And Elia had been with my family for about 3 generations when I met her. When Tia Evita, my great aunt, was just a little girl about 11, Elia came into the family. And then Tia Evita grew up, and Elia was right there with her. And when Tia Evita had children, Elia was there. And when those children had children, Elia was there. So by the time I met her, Elia knew a thing or two about dealing with Leivas. I think she had discovered sometime early on that the best way to get to our hearts was through our stomachs. Something that I, as you're going to hear shortly, I discovered. I remember that first few months in El Salvador, it was a real tough time. I got into a bilingual school, but all the kids outside of class spoke Spanish, and I didn't really speak Spanish. And let me tell you, it's one thing to get made fun of at lunch, but it's another thing to get made fun of when you don't know what the heck they're saying to you. All right? I learned a few words that I'm not going to repeat here, but I later learned not nice words. But I remember there was one day in particular, I was sitting on Tia Evita's couch at home, and it was a couch that wasn't my couch, and I was watching TV on a TV that wasn't my TV, and the TV was in Spanish, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. I gotta tell you, man, a life without understanding what the heck is being said on Pokemon might not be a life worth living. But I remember that day in particular, of all days, it was starting to wear, the weight of this change was starting to lean on me. And I just remember thinking, just sitting there watching that TV I couldn't understand, and that couch that wasn't mine, and that house that wasn't mine, just thinking, man, I really, really miss home. And I remember thinking about my parents, thinking like, why did you take me out of here? What was so wrong? What was so bad about Miami, Florida, that you had to fly me halfway across the continent to this place I'd never been to before? I just felt so angry at life then. Until Elia. Andresito. Huh? Andresito, yeah. ¿Ya comió? Did you already have something to eat? And in those days, I wasn't really liking food that wasn't Taco Bell or Pizza Hut. So even though I was a little hungry, I said, no, estoy bien, no gracias, no thank you. And she said, Andresito, tiene que comer algo, you gotta eat something. And I said, no, I'm okay. She's like, déjame prepararle algo, let me make something for you. So Elia goes into the back, into her world, the kitchen. She is a master at the kitchen. And she goes and she makes something for me. And what she makes for me is something that's called a mamazo. And a mamazo is a very, very traditional Salvadorian food. So traditional, in fact, that if anybody here Googled it, I would be surprised if you found it, because it's what we call comida del campo. That means rural food, food from the countryside. It's food. It's something that you make when you have nothing better to eat. What a mamazo is it's corn flour, maseca, here in the U.S., maseca. And you dab it in some water until you make a really sticky dough. And then you take cheese, with our cheese is all unpasteurized, queso fresco, fresh cheese. And you stick it in the dough, and you form a ball, and then you put that ball in the oven, and you let it cook. But you don't let it cook all the way. It comes out kind of half raw, with some sticky dough in there. And I remember she brought out this mamazo to me, this big, foul-looking ball of dough out to me. And I'm like, I don't know, Elia. This might be one of those reasons why El Salvador is kind of whack. And she says, no, hijo, pruébelo. Just go ahead, try it. And I said, all right, well, when in San Salvador, right? So I took this mamazo in both my little 8-year-old hands, and I bite into it. And it's the greatest thing I've ever had in my life. It has this like wonderfully crunchy exterior and if you've never had Salvadoran tortillas, man, let me tell you something. We win hands down the tortilla competition on the global stage. It's like crunchy on the outside, but it's got this gooey center that's like got this like deliciously salty cheese on the inside as a special surprise. But thinking back on it now, there's a certain flavor to it. There's a certain taste in it that I didn't have words for at the time, but I have words for now. And it tasted something like It tasted something like those 30 minutes after you get home from school, before you do homework, and you have those 30 minutes to yourself to goof off and to watch TV. And it tasted like that mountain, the mountain that I woke up to every morning in my bed. And it's the first thing I see in the morning, last thing I see at night. It tasted like the cicadas in the first week of April that let me know that Holy Week, spring break, is on the way. It tasted like running through the rain with my best friend. It tasted like the dirt in front of the house where I fell off my bike when I was 12 years old. And my friends were laughing at me, but it's okay because they picked me up. And it tasted like all these things that were yet to come, but I didn't know it yet. But I know what it was called. It tasted like home. See, in her way, Elia, when she made that mamazo for me, I think she was trying to tell me something. She was trying to tell me that this mamazo that I'm making for you, this tradition that I'm making for you, it's yours. This home, this strange land, I know it's strange, but it's yours. Because you look over there, that's the church where your mom and your dad got married when they were 23. And that over there, that's the road where your dad would have to walk and take 15 buses to get to school when he was 5 years old. And he would save the change from the bus driver to buy hot dogs on Fridays. And that's the hill where your grandfather would have to walk up and down every morning before school to take the ox to market. In her own way, Elia was telling me that all these traditions that you don't know yet, they're going to belong to you. And you don't know it yet. And I remember in that moment, I think I was a little gobsmacked because I was kind of still struggling with how good that thing tasted, that mamazo. And I like to imagine that Elia walked away with a little smile, and I think in her head, she was like, got him. Time passed. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, months turned into years. We got our own place. We moved away. I didn't see Elia every day the way I used to. I'd see her at Christmas. I'd see her at Thanksgiving. She always had a little smile. Hola, Andresito. Está comiendo mamazo. You getting mamazos? I miss her because she recently passed away. It was a little bit before the pandemic, but she was well into her 90s when she passed away. Now, I have a big family. Elia lived to see 4 generations of my family, I gotta tell you. It was 3 when I met her. She saw 4 before she passed. But everybody in my family has got an Elia story. Some pupusas, if you've never heard of them, they're delicious. For some, it was sopa de res, caldo de res, which is a beef stew when you're feeling sick. I got some wacky cousins in the wings, and I think a few of them even like some of her dishes like ejotes or huisquil, which I don't know why you would, but something for everyone. But I know what my Elia story is. See, Elia made that mamazo. She did something for me that nobody had done before then. She brought me home. That mamazo brought me home. Thank you.